Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
Once upon a time, in a one-dimensional kingdom called Elburn, there was a king and queen who got along very well with each other. They had 3 daughters whom they loved very much. All these daughters were always in the love and care of their parents, and 2 of these daughters inherited golden hair from their father, as well as emerald eyes that shone as if they were jewels. But the youngest princess was quite different. She was very different from her sisters, and thus had a hard time. Upon seeing her, people immediately talked amongst themselves, whispering amongst themselves because she really was incredibly different from her sisters. The girl had silver hair and also had eyes that symbolized analysis, the goddess of beauty and wisdom. And people assumed that in that case, this girl must have been the reincarnation of the goddess Aeneas herself. They really thought so. Indeed, just as everyone around her said, the younger princess possessed a fierce wisdom. She was as extraordinary as her beauty, and even some foreign scholars who came to test her intelligence were amazed at the depth of her knowledge and how she matched that radiance. They became her devoted followers, and gradually people even began to pay homage to her as if she were a living goddess. People brought her flowers and honey and various exotic fruits and all the beautiful things of that world. And thus, the footsteps that once led to the temple of the goddess Aeneas became much less frequent. The goddess, witnessing how the reverence and praise that should have been offered to the divine simply became directed at a mere mortal. Of course, the goddess was not happy with this, so she was filled with rage as no one was going to worship her anymore. She thought that the girl who had been created with the help of a divine gift, forgetting gratitude, acted as if she had been born of her own free will, in pride. And then when she grew up, she even dared to challenge the power of the gods. So of course the goddess was astonished by such actions. The deity believed that those who did not know their place and blindly believed those around them should receive the punishment they deserved for such horrible behavior. And so shortly after this happened, at the far northern edge of the continent, in a grandiose mountain range, the gates to the demon realm opened. Thousands upon thousands of demonic beings covered the mountains in completely black destruction, and they didn't look to cause harm and pain. These tempestuous creatures burned homes and buildings, completely oblivious to the civilians who suffered because of it. These demons took over that world and ended up devouring every living thing in their path. That way, they could grow even stronger. The creatures were able to move south quite quickly, and they were getting closer and closer to the kingdom where the princess lived. That's when people finally remembered a long-forgotten deity, namely the goddess protector who always defended them. They immediately rushed to the temple of Aeneas and simply begged her for her blessing and pardon. They hoped that the goddess would help them get rid of these demons and protect their sinful souls. It is not known if it was due to the desperate prayers of the people, but the goddess eventually appeared before them and granted prophecy. It's said that, with the blood of the nearest and purest virgin, they should receive what they most desired. Hearing this oracle, the people immediately rushed to the palace, and they dragged out the princess they had once believed in. That girl who had been honored and exalted by them, they spoke again in unison, but they were already words of horror and contempt toward the princess. People shouted and talked about how the princess had dared to take the goddess's place, and that was why the goddess had decided to punish them. They were going to sacrifice the princess and present her to the goddess, because they thought that in this way they could get rid of this terrible curse. They had indeed kidnapped the princess and wanted to sacrifice her blood to the goddess, but the girl didn't object. When her father tried to defend her, she told him to do as they said. She would be all right. Of course the king was confused, but he spoke to his daughter and said there was still time. She only had to wait a little while. He believed they could find another solution soon, but the girl didn't believe that was possible. Therefore, the princess, who was once considered a goddess by everyone, told her father that if her sacrifice could restore things to the way they were, she herself would even throw herself into the fire without hesitation. The man simply had no choice, and with tears of sorrow, the king ended up placing 9 seals on the heart of his beloved youngest daughter. And at that moment, the silver-haired princess and the entire royal palace shone brightly. Thus, they were able to expel the demons from their land and continent. Thus, the king who banished the demons united the 3 destroyed kingdoms and 17 city-states that founded a new empire called Luinaria. The girl who had been a princess up to that point felt extreme pain when her father put a seal on her. She couldn't contain these feelings within herself, so she just tried to fight, but it was all useless. She wanted someone to free her, but it was impossible. And as soon as the girl who had brown hair saw this terrifying dream that frightened her, she immediately woke up. Because she was scared, it was her whole face covered with sweat. Then she heard a little girl's voice nearby. This little girl ran somewhere else, turning to her mom and talking about how their sweet little sister was finally awake. The girl, who had just woken up hearing something about her mom, was very surprised, and when she turned her head to the side, she actually saw a woman. She held this little girl's hand and said that she really did when she saw that her daughter was okay. It was certainly a huge relief for her. She said that the girl hadn't moved for 3 days and was only breathing, but now she had finally opened her eyes. She smiled at her eldest daughter while hugging her youngest, and wondered if she had gained some awareness after being in an emotionless state. The girl only sat there looking at them in surprise. She didn't understand what was even going on, so she decided to just ask where she was. The woman, who was carrying dirty laundry in her hands, said she was in the Bokrion. She explained in more detail that she was in the far north of Bukharian, beneath a great mountain range. As soon as the girl heard this, she was astonished and immediately wondered, was she somehow able to get her out of the magic circle? Her mother, hearing these words, was very surprised. She did not understand a word, but the girl suddenly continued to scream, asking, was she a magician? She still did not understand how she could be there. She immediately started asking about everything that happened with that war and the demons that were attacking them. She also asked if His Highness was safe now, but the woman understood absolutely nothing. Her mother, smiling nervously, immediately wondered what she was even talking about, and also added that she knew nothing, had no idea about any war or monsters. The girl, hearing these words, was astonished. She, in that case, did not understand at all what had happened then and why this woman was not aware of it. She knew for a fact that she was following a divine message and assumed it was likely that the magic just hadn't worked yet at that point. Suddenly, a little girl tugged on the woman's sleeve and asked her mom, did their sweet little sister just call them magicians? The woman didn't understand how to explain all this to the girl, for she had a good imagination, so she explained that her sister was just very tired. She also told her that it was best to let the girl get some rest, and decided to leave for a while, in order for her to really get back to normal. And so, as her mother was about to leave, the girl suddenly turned to her and told her that she was the Siren of Elburn, the Princess of Elburn. She also said that she was ready to swear on her own name not to harm them under any circumstances, so she just asked that they tell her the whole truth. Her voice suddenly trailed off into a shout, and she said that she wished they would at least tell her how His Highness was doing. The girl's mother was astonished. She immediately inquired of the miss if she was certainly all right. But the girl took it all as a game and asked her mother, did this beautiful sister still play dukes? She also explained to her that she didn't want to play into all of this anymore. Serena interrupted her and told her if it was hard to tell her the truth. In that case, she decided to go and ask others about it. At that moment, she jumped up from the bed and was about to run away. As soon as she opened the door to leave, she couldn't believe what unfolded right before her eyes. As soon as Siren stepped outside, she saw a huge snowfall. She couldn't believe that it was really real. But as soon as she saw the whole view, she immediately realized that she had indeed somehow ended up in the north. After the girl had calmed down, she went back to the cabin. She was told everything, and decided to summarize a bit. The girl asked, did she understand everything correctly, that it was the 365th year of the imperial calendar? They were in the Empire of Luinaria, which was founded by Elborn after the exile of the demon and monster king, specifically in the village of Tenisto of the Forest Duchy of Baloa. And the siren also said that the people who had saved her from freezing in Moon Lake 3 days ago were just that, Vanessa and her daughter Lenny. Vanessa, immediately smiling, said that it was indeed all true. It was, very glad that the girl was able to realize this information rather quickly. She herself was actually very glad that this strange girl was in a normal state and healthy after 3 days and nights spent unconscious. The woman also said that she was very glad that the girl was able to take in all the information rather quickly, because the healer had talked about how she should have had amnesia after she woke up. Serena was very upset. She didn't understand at all why all this hardship had fallen on her shoulders. But when she looked at Vanessa and this little girl, even though she was a woman, she still found her appearance and aura quite attractive. And if it weren't for their black hair color, which was a clear sign of a commoner, it would even help to believe that this was the daughter of a nobleman. Vanessa thought at that moment that even her untrained eye could see that, and she didn't know how the High Mighty would have perceived her. But she believed she had saved her life, and that meant this girl had to repay them one day. The woman also thought that when the right time came, she would be able to make a perfect fortune for herself and her daughter in this way. Serena, on the other hand, was at this point completely unsure of what to do or what was even going on. If these women were telling the truth, that would change everything. If this information was true, the girl knew that they had found themselves together for a very long time in the past, the very day she had stood on the magic circle. But the girl was horrified and didn't understand how this could even happen. Serena believed that the magic circle that sealed the Demon King may have had a spell that transcended time and space, and thus that spell had somehow affected her. But also, the girl was well aware that she couldn't fully trust the words of this strange woman, so she still made the decision to be very careful. Suddenly, the siren turned to the little girl and asked her if it was true that she had found her on Moon Lake. Lena immediately said that this was indeed the case. She was walking in the forest gathering various herbs and saw her. Then the woman asked to take her there if it would not be too much trouble for her. The girl, of course, didn't mind. They had dressed quite warmly, but still it was incredibly cold outside, so they were very cold, especially Siren, who wasn't used to this climate. They were walking through the woods straight to this lake, and the girl noticed that her coat smelled musty, and she didn't like it. Yes, and on top of that there were little rocks rattling around in her boots. She really wished she could get it all off as soon as possible, but she couldn't, as it was keeping her warm in some way. Serena decided to calm down a bit, for she realized that at that moment it wasn't important at all. She was wondering how far away this place was from the kingdom. She also wanted to know what had happened in all the centuries she had been in some other place. She needed to see everything with her own eyes. And so, as the girls were walking through the forest, a man suddenly appeared behind them. It was a man, and he recognized Lene. He immediately asked what she was doing there and where she was going. The girl, seeing him, was immediately very happy. She smiled happily and said hello to her brother Hans and ran up to him to give him a hug. The man, as soon as he saw the siren, was very surprised, but Lena replied that they were heading toward Moonlight Lake. But then suddenly the siren interrupted the girl and wondered if she could ask him a question. She would very much like him to tell her what year it was. Of course Hanzo was very confused, but the girl came closer to him and asked, what was this place anyway? She directly flooded him with questions and asked him, what happened to the Fire Demon King that invaded the continent? Had the monsters completely retreated and left them alone? The man didn't know what to say to her. He didn't understand what Demon King and monsters she was talking about at all. He even assumed she was delusional, because no one in their right mind and solid memory would say such a thing. But when Hanzo took a closer look at her face, he noticed that she was very beautiful, and he even found it hard to believe that she was an ordinary person like him. He was well aware that he couldn't miss the chance to socialize with such a beauty in this rural area, so he decided to at least make an impact. Hanzo turned to her and asked if she was referring to the history of the early days of the empire. Seeing her surprised expression, he said that she was the youngest daughter of the first emperor who thought she was a goddess, and it was she who sacrificed herself along with the Demon King to free their lands from these horrible monsters. The man also pointed his hands around and said that this village was built on the great mountain where this very demon king directly appeared. As soon as the siren heard all this, she was amazed. But the man also said that he had never seen her before in these vicinities, and inquired, who was she anyway? Of course, the man didn't believe all the things he told him, as he knew they were just legends and couldn't be true. Serena, hearing the whole situation, said that it just couldn't have happened. She suddenly started running off into the woods somewhere and said that it was all just nonsense. She didn't think it was true. Lene immediately shouted, turning to the girl and asking for her to stop. But when she realized that she wasn't going to, she apologized to Hanzo and said that they would talk more later. The man at this point was incredibly upset because this girl was incredibly beautiful on the outside, but he assumed that she had hit her head very hard and therefore just lost her mind. Serena, meanwhile, was running through a forest unknown to her and kept telling herself that it was impossible. It had been a full 300 years since she had been on the magic circle, and after her sacrifice, the Demon King had disappeared, and her clan had built a great empire and raised the prestige of the royal family. Of course, it was hard for the girl to believe it all, but what was more important was that she had somehow inexplicably still survived. Siren received worship and praise, envy, jealousy, but she never desired any of that. She didn't want people to worship her like a deity. She didn't want that. And now that she has given up her life as a princess, who was ultimately sacrificed, she has ended up being someone unknown to everyone. It was a great trauma for Siren, and she didn't know how this could have happened. She needed time to accept this truth. By then, Lenny had finally caught up with her. She ran up to the girl and wanted to say something, but suddenly the siren spoke without noticing the girl. The woman turned to the goddess, analyzing, and wondered if this was what her will was as a sign of punishment for her. It had been quite some time since then, and the siren was beginning to settle into the small house she had woken up in. One fine evening, she stood by the stove and cooked dinner for them all. It had been 7 whole days since she had woken up. She was now keenly aware of the fact that she was in a world that was 300 years too late after she had somehow managed to survive. All of her relatives and acquaintances, of course, had long ago died, so she couldn't turn to them for help or any even basic explanations. The girl's only possession was the white dress she had worn all the time in her past life. She never had to worry about money, of course, but now it had become her biggest problem. Serena understood the fact that even if she sought help from the palace, with her black hair and black eyes, she wouldn't have a mark that would prove her identity. Of course, the girl felt uncomfortable, for she didn't like the house and didn't want to stay there, but she had no choice. When she was about to finish making a very dietary soup, because they didn't have money for more food, Lene suddenly ran up to her. She called her her little sister and said she asked her to stir the fur coat so it wouldn't stick to the bottom, and it was the only food they had for dinner. But because the girl was thinking about her own, she even forgot to stir it. So the siren immediately apologized and said that she was just not used to working in the kitchen. The girl was not impressed at all. She said it wasn't just a kitchen job. In the time that Siren had been staying with them, they had realized that she couldn't clean, do laundry, or even make a bed properly. But now it turned out that she couldn't cook either. In order that their only dinner would not be spoiled, the girl asked that she finish and better go and just gather firewood. Serena didn't mind because she knew she had to help these people around the house. She couldn't do anything, so she got dressed and went outside. It was quite a heavy snowstorm and very cold. The girl didn't understand how she could work in such a cold place for a whole day. Siren now realized that the life of a commoner who didn't have enough money was incredibly harsh, and especially in the north. She walked and gathered small sticks to her basket and realized that even though she could speak the ancient multitude of languages, they were useless for making a living. Therefore, the girl did not understand at all how she could be of any use in that life. And after some time, she finally collected the necessary amount of branches and was about to go to the hut, when suddenly she heard some rustling and saw a small black kitten. When she saw him, she was a little surprised, but immediately came closer, not understanding what a cat could be doing so far up in the mountains, and even in such cold. But the siren, reaching forward, wanted to pet her and called to her to come closer. But the cat, of course, was frightened and ran away. This made the girl very sad, because all she wanted to do was pet it. But then she realized that even if the cat came up to her, she wouldn't have anything to give it. So she thought it was even better. After a while, Siren returned to the house. They had already set the table for their meager supper, and everyone began to eat. Vanessa suddenly paid attention to the girl and immediately wondered, did she not want to eat anymore? After a few spoonfuls, she didn't even touch the food. The woman also said that if she wasn't going to eat anymore, she'd better give some of it to Lena. Serena didn't object, so she handed the little girl her portion of food. As soon as she saw it, she immediately glowed with joy, because she had never had enough dinner. She immediately thanked the siren for that, and the girl then sat down and took her seat back, sighing heavily. She thought about her situation for a moment. Of course, the uncertainty of the future made her think a lot. She knew she couldn't stay in that place forever, but then she had to figure out what to do. She didn't know what she could do, because she had just grown up in a castle and knew everything the aristocrats did, but she hadn't been taught how to make a living. There was always someone to take care of everything. She didn't even know how to do basic things around the house. And now that so many years had passed since she had lived, and the world had become very unfamiliar, all she had was just a white dress and a lot of sadness. At dinner, the siren looked out the window and realized that having received worship, praise, and envy without ever wanting it, and after being drawn to sacrifice as a princess, she was now an unknown to everyone, and life had become very hard. But it also meant that when no one knew her, she was free. The girl had a lot of new opportunities and time on her hands. She could now fulfill all her dreams that she would not have been able to do as an aristocrat. Then suddenly the siren turned to Vanessa and said that she had one request that the girl would like to ask. The hostess, hearing this, was at once a little surprised and replied to the girl that she had no more soup, so she could not, unfortunately, give her any. But the girl replied that it had nothing to do with the soup at all. She just wanted to find a job in that place, so she wanted Vanessa to help her. So the next day, Siren and Vanessa went straight to town, and when they arrived, the girl suddenly stopped outside the castle and said that they had arrived. The girl happily, looking at the girl who had saved her, also smiled and thanked her for it. When Siren got up from the wagon, she immediately looked around and noticed that it was indeed the ducal estate. She was very glad to be there. It was quite expected to tell Vanessa all this, and she was very glad that the girl had helped her with her choice of where she could get a job. The woman told her that the ducal estate was just hiring maids, so the siren went there first thing. Serena thought about the fact that when the girl had escorted her, she had shown that she was indeed a very nice person, and to her that was incredibly valuable. When the lady approached the knight, who was standing near the entrance, said that she had come to apply for the position of maid. Also, Vanessa said she took the girl behind her because she was her distant relative and was also looking for a job. She also said that since this girl was from a deep village, she didn't have an identification badge, but she was willing to vouch for her. As soon as the knight heard all this, he immediately smiled happily. Vanessa looked at him tiredly, not understanding why he was so happy at all. But the man, making a very serious expression on his face, told her to show her identification code in that case, because he had to verify at least her identity. In fact, Vanessa had been a little surprised when the girl had approached her last night with this request. She never expected Siren to be able to take the initiative to find a job on her own. But now that one had brought it to that point, it was all just perfect. She was also bothered by the fact that the girl gave no sign that she wanted to leave, even after a few days. And Vanessa thought that if she was hired as a maid in the Duke's estate, she would have food and a roof over her head, as well as a decent salary, so the girl could exhale with relief already. Of course, the woman was a little worried that she couldn't do any household chores at all. But since she sometimes spoke complicated words, she seemed pretty smart. Therefore, she thought that Siren would be contentedly successful in this interview, and if she was hired as a maid, With her outstanding beauty, she would be able to achieve many successes. Vanessa finally did find her pass and handed it to the man, who glared directly at the siren behind her. After everything was checked, they went forward. And Vanessa also thought about the fact that instead of being a nobody, she should be more attentive to the noble lord and change her fate. And so, as they were starting to head straight for the manor, Vanessa suddenly stopped and asked that the siren listen to her very carefully. The woman said that the reason why the ducal estate was hiring maids so quickly was because the second young master of the ducal family, who was a famous general of the capital, had inherited the title of duke after the recent funeral of the duchess. Vanessa had also heard that he was very wasteful, so his estate was undergoing renovations and various decor upgrades, so every day there became even more noisy. Well, the woman also said that she couldn't have gotten such a good job anywhere else, so she had to make the best effort to get hired and not take any other options into her head. Of course, the siren, hearing all of this, was a bit wary. She realized that the future was now in her hands, and because of that, she was a little uncomfortable. There they finally arrived at the door, where Vanessa said that the woman should go on alone. She also added that she believed in her and that everything was going to be okay. She also warned Siren that if she couldn't make it, she should just eat meat soup together afterward. Smiling, the girl said that she shouldn't have worried, because any work that was done sincerely and responsibly was eventually realized. Vanessa was a little confused as to what she was talking about, but the siren, smiling happily, went already inside the castle and said they would see each other a little later. As soon as she went inside, there she was met on the threshold by a man. He asked that she wait for a while in front of the other doors, and the interviewer would come already. As soon as Siren looked around, she saw a lot of girls. She actually didn't expect so many people to want to apply for the maid position. But she also noticed that they all looked pretty excited, so she assumed that these girls really wanted the job. Then she saw several girls standing next to each other, and assumed she must be standing there as well. At that moment, a rather stern-looking lady came into the courtyard. She spoke very loudly to everyone present and said that she was the maid of honor Rona, and next to her was the head maid Sarah. The woman explained that they were the ones who were to conduct this interview for the maid role, so she asked that everyone get ready. Rowana also said that when she would pass by them, she would have each of them give her name, age, and place of origin. The girl also said that afterwards they had to tell what they were the best at. The woman immediately started going through her perimeter and watched all the girls closely. Serena at this point was well aware that if she looked at her like that, the girl wouldn't even be able to say a normal word, because she would just be confused about it. But then, the girl released her gaze downward as she waited her turn and wondered what she was best at. Serena was well aware that if she had to name anything she was thinking about, it would be the fact that she could speak nearly 30 languages. She could also say that she could read and write in different handwritings and distinguish absolutely any of them. But at that moment, it was perfectly clear even to Siren that these were all completely useless qualities for the job of a maid, so she had to name a fact that would be useful in the role of a maid. All this time she had been thinking about what she could be good at, and then suddenly, the woman had already walked directly up to her and told her to get started. Serena even jumped a little from surprise and looked at the girl in surprise and asked what she wanted. Rowana replied in a very stern voice that she didn't understand why the girl didn't start talking as commanded, and asked where all her thoughts were in the first place. She didn't want to waste too much time, so she simply asked that the girl state her name, age, background, and what she was best at. Serena, waving her head, immediately replied that she was 18 years old, gave her name, and said that she lived in the village of Shadow Forest and was Vanessa's niece. The girl also said that her hometown was the province of Verona Ronda, and the thing she was best at was making tea. As soon as Siren said those words, she immediately started smiling because she was very happy that this thought came to her mind in time. In fact, it was true, and she was the only person who ever didn't do her homework. The only activity she did, and which she was very good at learning because her father liked it, was directly making tea. In fact, she never thought that the tea brewing skills she had learned in order to create good memories of her father could one day be of use to her. But the woman at this moment, suddenly smiling evilly, wondered if she was really talking about how her greatest accomplishment was making tea. She also said it was a pretty interesting statement that she had never heard before. In fact, brewing tea was more than just steeping the leaves in hot water. It was an advanced skill that involved using the right teapot for different types of tea and brewing them to the master's taste. Therefore, Roanna smiled and thought about the fact that this girl from the countryside applying to be a maid claimed to be able to do it very well, and even dared to say it out loud. She thought it something unthinkable, and told the girl at once that if she thought that by telling such a brazen lie she would gain an audience with the owner of the estate, it was not so. Also, the woman said that she should have thought she was more interested in getting attention at her age than actually doing the work. But the siren immediately screamed and said that wasn't a lie at all. She replied that she had told the very real truth, what she was best at. The woman was not convinced by this. She told her to stop and stated that since what she said was true, she was going to find her a position. She originally wanted to test her abilities and said that if it all turned out to be a lie, she was not only going to punish the siren, but also the woman who was responsible for her. The girl wasn't at all frightened by this and said that she was going to prove with all her might that it wasn't a lie. So Roanna soon brought her a whole tea set with several teapots and different kinds of tea. The woman told the siren to choose a suitable teapot for the leaves in the tea she showed her. The girl immediately reached for one of the jars and smelled an incredibly strong scent as she sniffed it. And as soon as she smelled that bright aroma of tea, she knew immediately what she had to do. The girl told her that Enrica's leaf was the one in her hand. Serena glimpsed at her and said that the surface she had presented in front of the girl did not have that teapot to brew just that tea. Roanna was immediately angry upon hearing this and shouted at her, wondering why the girl thought he wasn't there. The siren then explained that Enrica tea leaves were made from the young leaves of the Enrica tree that first sprouted in early spring, and they should have been brewed in a glass teapot at a low temperature for a short time to bring out their subtle flavor and aroma. The teapots that were on the table were all ceramic, so the girl answered her that there was no suitable one there. Of course it made her very angry, but turning the other way, she said it was the right thing to do. The girl didn't understand how the siren could say that, for she planned to humiliate her and kick her out for wrong answers. But now, unfortunately for her, it didn't go the way she expected. So the woman still told the girl to stay there in the courtyard, and she would give her final answer a little later. She approached the next candidate and asked that she introduce herself. From that moment on, quite a considerable amount of time had passed, and now finally the audience was over. The woman was silent for a while, and after that she was going to announce the successful candidates to everyone. Roanna explained that she had officially assigned the 4 maids to their manor as soon as she would say the final result. But she was so angry that the siren had shown a good result, so she entrusted the matter to the head maid, who with a smile on her face immediately agreed to it. The woman said she agreed with the lady's order. She would escort the successful candidates to their new apartment, where they were to live. Then she asked that all should follow her. This applied to some of the candidates, and they were all at once very happy, for they were overjoyed at the thought that from this day forward, they were now to be the helpers of this estate. As the siren followed the girl, she suddenly saw that there was a man watching them upstairs. She didn't even have time to look closely, because a door suddenly opened nearby. Vanessa's face appeared from there and immediately inquired what she was doing there, and told her to follow the maids. The girl immediately apologized. She set off after them all, and wondered if she had made a mistake by accident, for she felt as if someone was watching her. But because she was interrupted, she couldn't really look closely enough to see if that was really true. Roanna, who had returned already to the manor, was still very angry. She didn't understand how this could have happened, and she was incredibly dissatisfied with the candidates who had passed the qualifying round. Of course, she had no choice but to say that she had hired her, but she didn't know. Did the siren really think she could work in this place after daring to cross the chief maid of the ducal household? The woman certainly didn't like this turn of events, so she was going to give the girl a happy life. Roanna was going to make sure to get rid of the siren within the 1-week trial period, as this girl was definitely not bringing her pleasure, happiness, and she was just annoying her. At that very moment, the very candidates who had qualified to be maids had already been led into a small room where several beds stood side by side. That was where they were to live now. One of the newly minted young maids immediately laid down on the bed and said it felt like a dream come true. It was very hard for this young lady to believe that she was really now a maid on the Duke's estate. Serena, who had been watching all of this with great disbelief, wondered if becoming a maid was really that exciting. And the girl, who was ready to just jump with happiness, immediately cried out and said that of course she was. Her family owned a department store, and she worked all day long without a single day off. So with a relieved exhale, the girl said that now that she thought about all of this, she realized that she hadn't even introduced herself and said her name was Irene. Then she pointed to another girl with short hair and said it was Ashley, and next to her was Becky. Smiling happily, Irene asked if it was true that she was a siren, and also said that she had surprised the head maid of honor earlier. And with delight in her voice, she said that the glass teapot was even something she didn't know such a thing could even exist. A little embarrassed, the siren said that there was nothing wrong with that. She was just taking the opportunity to learn more about brewing tea, because it was something she enjoyed. Of course, the girl expected this room to not be very luxurious, but she didn't think that the bed could be so hard, and it would also smell very unpleasant. She had already hoped that after that horrible red soup from Vanessa's house, she would have something better. But she was wrong. Now she had a stinky hard bed. Well, of course there was nothing she could do about it. She just had to be patient and strong enough to endure this torment. Irene, at this point, lay down on the bed again and said that the siren was very lucky, for she was so beautiful and very intelligent. She also added that she thought the girl could meet an outstanding person among them. The girl immediately looked at her in surprise and asked what she meant, and the maid asked if that was the reason she had not applied for the maid job. Irene explained that there were a lot of commoner knights in this estate, so the chance they had to meet love after all. She also said that she had dreamed of marrying a knight ever since she was a little girl, and now that she had been hired as a maid, she could possibly fulfill that dream. Serena, hearing all of this, was stunned, for she had only come to this place because she had no choice. She had woken up completely randomly in this place unknown to her, and it turned out to be her only decision on how she should live her life. Right now, she couldn't even think about the luxury of being with someone like her. She needed to take care of herself first. She thought that unlike her past, she would finally be able to live an independent life and be free. But when she was left all alone in a place unknown to her, she realized that she even missed her family a little. At this moment, Irene suddenly noticed that something was wrong with her expression and immediately asked, "What happened?" Serena realized that she needed to pull herself together and not be weak. After all, she should have died in the first place. But in the end, she was given a second chance and a new life, so she had to make the most of it. Even if no one knew who she was still the last princess of the Elven Kingdom, and she needed to behave with the pride of royalty and never lose her dignity, even though she didn't have that status now. The girl didn't answer her question and started to make the bed, saying that they had a lot of work to do still the next day, so she would prefer to go to bed early. Irene was no doubt a little surprised at this behavior, but immediately said it was no problem and wished her good night. And so, when the next day came, they were all already changed into their maid uniforms and stood to begin their long-awaited work. There they were immediately met by the head maid and told that the maids, who were on probation, were to take charge of cleaning the staircases and the outer castle. Roanna, who was also there, said that the stairs were located in the eastern and western parts of the palace, and how they would distribute the work was up to them. They had to make their own arrangements among themselves. But then, suddenly she turned to Siren personally and said that she would check her completed work very carefully, so they couldn't even think about resting, as they had to complete the work before lunch. The maids in one voice immediately said that everything would be done. Then the woman shouted, handing them their tools and telling them to start their work already. When Siren arrived at one of the staircases with Irene, they were incredibly stunned when they saw the filth. Certainly they had not expected to see something like this in the ducal palace. The girl also realized that she had never thought that cleaning could require such skills. But when she looked at the Siren and her work, she was amazed. The girl was trying so hard to accomplish this cleaning. Her face was incredibly focused on cleaning the staircase just perfectly. But Irene realized that this girl was completely hopeless and assumed that she hadn't even worked a day in her life because she was doing everything completely wrong and would only pollute the stairs even more. The moment she told her that she didn't even know what a scoop was, the girl knew she should have refused her company along with herself, but for some reason she didn't, and now they were on the same team. Irene stood back and watched her work, realizing it was a terrible decision. She had already explained to her several times about the right thing to do, but she didn't understand why the girl still didn't heed her advice and did things the way she shouldn't have. The girl also realized that at these speeds, it would be much faster if Irene did everything herself, but realized that would be very wrong, so only helped her. Their performance during this trial period would determine whether or not they would get a contract for a while, so Irene couldn't do all the work and let her just devour its fruits. Oh, and besides, after years of working with various employees at her family's store, she knew it all too well. Irene realized that if someone stuck around someone who had no love for the job, they'd just have to clean up after them forever, and she certainly wasn't going to agree to that. The girl thought about the fact that people would just think that all the work was done by a very cute Siren who had a beautiful face, so the girl just couldn't afford it. Irene turned to her partner and told her that she would be gone for a while, as the head maid had already checked her work. The girl, of course, didn't mind and said that she was really sorry, but also added that she shouldn't have worried about it and just go rest, because she had already accomplished everything she needed to do. Although Irene felt a little bad about leaving her alone, she simply had no choice, so she headed back to the maid's room, leaving her partner alone. Serena felt very bad about it, realizing that she had done the job wrong, thus delaying her partner and letting not only herself down, but her too. The girl was very sad because she didn't know how to do a particular job properly, and because of that, she just might lose the position. She now realized that being a maid was much more difficult than being just a princess, and the job humored her. After a while, Roanna came in for a checkup and started yelling at the Siren, of course, saying that her training had been botched, and the woman was very happy about it. She also said that the girl didn't finish her work on time, so she wouldn't have gotten extra points either. Roanna was very happy at this moment, because she realized that she probably wouldn't even have to intervene because this girl herself wouldn't be able to handle this job conclusively and would just give up in the end. Turning around and leaving, she told the Siren that the inspection was complete, but it was still her responsibility, so she had to make sure she finished the job before she left. The girl said that she would do everything, and she remained standing with her head down, for she realized that she would have to stay there for an eternity until she finished her work. At that moment, the Siren really pondered over whether or not she could continue working in this manner as a maid, for she really had absolutely no skills at all. She thought about the fact that it was only a basic cleanup after all, but at the same time as the others finished everything on time, she hadn't even done half of her job. Of course, she was incredibly sad about it. She realized that what she had learned when she was a princess and now for her as a maid was completely useless. This knowledge had no value. The Siren also thought about the fact that she had absolutely no idea how she could even continue to live in that manner, much less fulfill her daily duties. But at that moment, she suddenly heard some sound behind her, followed by the meow of a cat. She immediately turned her head to the side and saw him right in front of her. The girl was very surprised, for she did not expect to see this kitten again, For the last time they saw each other, it was in the forest. Serena stepped closer to him and was about to pet him, wondering if he happened to be in the forest with her then, for he did look very similar. She immediately smiled as she stroked the kitten and wondered, has he really been following her all this time? It wasn't a long drive, so it really surprised her. Of course, it all looked impossible, but still she was very happy to see this kitten again. The girl started stroking him and he purred back in appreciation and was very happy that she was paying attention to him. Tears of joy suddenly began to well up in her eyes, and she wondered, did he really come to comfort and cheer her up? For that was indeed what it looked like. She also said that she must have been more lonely than she thought, because she couldn't believe that a cat's attention could have moved her like that. Well, here suddenly she got to her feet and thought about the fact that it was really true. There was no possible way she wouldn't find something she could do in that huge castle. Serena realized that she just had to wait, and then she would be able to see that she would do everything right. The girl was going to wait until the next day so she could show what she could do in those training sessions. Well, for starters, she realized that of course she had to finish the work that was intended for the day, so she immediately headed back to the stairs to do directly that. When the next day came, the kitchen was very busy, as it had always been since morning, as they had to get everything done in time. The head cook immediately turned to the others and said that they had brought a lot of leftovers that day, which really alarmed her because she knew that this was not the way to do it. The girl replied in a shaky voice that there had been a lot of leftover food since the new maids and visitors had arrived, and she assumed it was because their culinary skills were not as honed as in the South. The head cook said that since he lived in the capital, it was understandable that he had more refined tastes, so the man would naturally bring the food back. Also, with her head down, she said that she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff and really wished someone would give her advice on the Duke's taste preferences. Then she would be absolutely sure she could cook something suitable for him. And at that moment, her conversation was suddenly interrupted by the voice of a siren who had come to them. She apologized and explained that she had been assigned to work in the kitchen that day by order of the chief maid of honor. Bowing low, she gave her name and said it was a pleasure to meet you. As soon as the cook heard that name, she was immediately a little surprised and said that she remembered. She was, after all, the maid's new apprentice. Serena waved her head to the side and said she did, while the cook herself wondered if Rowana had actually told her last day about it. The maid of honor asked, as she gave her a task she could never handle, but by no means something she could handle easily. Of course, the cook didn't even know what to do. And besides, what could Serena have done that was so bad, the maid of honor, since she had asked her for such a favor? But as she looked at Serena, she wondered why it was necessary to send someone as fragile as her, who could break with just a single push. The woman really thought it very sensible, for the work in the kitchen was already very difficult, and she felt that there was no need to complicate it further by the presence of such a girl. Then she turned to Serena and said that she couldn't even lift an iron cauldron, and wondered what use the girl could be in the kitchen. For a while the girl hesitated. She knew perfectly well that it was all useless, but they really weren't wrong. She was a terrible cleaner, so her job in the kitchen would probably be even worse. The only kitchen work she had ever done was helping Lena in the shady forest. She didn't get much help even then, of course, because the girl realized that she'd rather do everything herself. And she also realized the fact that, as things stood, this training session she was supposed to have that day would go just as horribly as the last one. Serena immediately began looking around for a job she could easily do that wouldn't let herself down. She looked at the dirty dishes and unwashed and uncut fruits and vegetables and realized that there must be something she could do. Then an idea occurred to her. She spoke loudly and said that there was something in the kitchen that she could do, so she asked the cook to make an exception for her. The girl had nothing else to do but agree. She said that in that case the girl should have helped them with the dirty dishes first. And walking past the tables, Serena suddenly noticed the plethora of leftover food and said that she didn't know who it was cooked for, but this dish certainly wasn't a good combination. Of course, as soon as the cook heard this, she immediately yelled at her, asking her what she was even saying such a thing. And Serena explained quite calmly that a sweet potato-based salad served next to a thick steak was very difficult to digest, and a healthy adult male could manage, but women and children with weaker stomachs might even get sick. She explained to the cook that if it were her, she would only use sliced pineapple or a refreshing citrus flavor. Serena explained that it aided digestion and would balance out the richness of the meal. It was the kind of meal that would be best for anyone. It would be able to satiate but not overload. As soon as the cook heard this, she was truly surprised. She looked at the girl for a while and then asked, "Is she really the daughter of a famous chef since she knew all this?" But with a smile, Serena said that wasn't true at all. She just said what came to her mind after looking at that food, and nothing more. In fact, in the past, the Elver royal family had guided the central and southern parts of the continent. And thanks to the mild climate and fertile lands, the kingdom developed a fine cuisine. It was balanced by a variety of ingredients and flavors. And even after all this time, it made sense that not both girls were more sensitive than the people up north. She could sense flavors and aromas perfectly. So as soon as she looked at these dishes, she immediately noticed that this was the worst choice of all the combinations. But she didn't know if people would even listen to her, since she was just a simple maid who was even on probation. The chef, in her opinion, always had pride. And even if she was right, surely the girl probably wouldn't take it so easily. And when Serena looked at her, she immediately noticed that she was even having trouble answering her phrase. Suddenly, the cook grabbed her hands and immediately asked her what her name was, for she had completely forgotten it. Serena was a little surprised. She didn't know what to expect from this woman, but she immediately gave her name. But then suddenly the chef, head down, asked if she could help her with the cooking and food combinations. As soon as Serena heard this, she immediately got excited because she thought it was the most perfect job for her, so it was only natural that she accepted. Then the chef explained that since the Duke had died and a second young master had taken his place, then he had left food on his plate quite often. He had spent most of his life in the capital, so he had a very refined taste in food. And still, if he didn't like something, of course the chef would want him to say something about it instead of keeping quiet. But that unfortunately didn't happen. Of course, she couldn't just go and ask this man called the Butcher of the Battlefield about his tastes and preferences, because she cared about her life. So she said that if things continued like this, her position as a chef would be in huge jeopardy, but she just didn't know what to do about it. Of course, Serena sympathized with Lady Helen over this, because she knew that Battlefield Butcher was certainly not a simple nickname. She realized that this man was so scary to Vanessa and the chef that they even talked about him that way. But she didn't understand the reason why it happened that way, so she was very curious. Smiling, the girl told Helen not to worry, for she might not be that important, but would be able to do her best to find out what the Duke's preferred tastes were. As soon as the chef heard this, her eyes immediately shone with joy, because it meant that her job could be saved. She even thought that God had sent her this child as a sign of his favor on her, and had decided to help her in this way. Some time had passed since then, and all the girls went back to work. Some of them were handling the dishes, while others were preparing a new lunch. Serena, on the other hand, went around and tested many different combinations of food to see how they went together, and edit that out if necessary. Helen was very focused, and at the same time she was very scared, because she wanted everything to go well, so she wouldn't have to be embarrassed in front of the Duke again for the unpalatable food. And so, after a few hours, dinner was finally prepared. They put it on beautiful plates and on the wings with a special dish, in order that it would not be obvious from the beginning what kind of food it was. Then suddenly, Helen turned to the siren as the food left and asked, what would happen if he left the food on the plate again and passed it around? The girl replied that it was quite normal, for she had faith in her abilities, so she replied that without any doubt the plates would have been spotlessly clean that time. But the chef herself wasn't so sure anymore. She was really very worried, so her voice was shaking, and she said that all they had to do was wait. From that moment, some time passed, and now the butler who took the food to the Duke returned with empty plates, saying that the Duke this time ate absolutely everything to the last crumb. He also said the man seemed very satisfied and even asked, "Did they really change the chef, since the food has changed so much in flavor?" Of course, Helen was incredibly happy when she heard the news. She ran to Selena and immediately started hugging her in gratitude and appreciation. The girl hugged her back and began to congratulate her on such a great achievement. She talked about how excellent it was, and that everything had turned out okay. Helen hugged her so tightly that the girl found it very difficult to breathe at one point, and she told the chef so. The woman loosened her grip a little, but continued to hug and thank her for actually being able to save her from being fired, thus helping her keep her job. She also told the girl, suddenly, on a burst of happiness, that she didn't know what she'd do without her. Surely, if she cooked a terrible meal again, she'd just get fired. But the siren began to protest and said that this was not true at all. She only gave some advice, and the main work the woman did on her own. So the girl did not understand why she was thanked so much. Of course, the girl had never actually known that so many people put effort and worry just because of one meal for her master. But now she realized how important it was to all those people. It was only after some time that the siren was able to realize this. And if she had known this in her past life, she would surely have been able to thank her court chefs for their beautiful masterpieces. The girl always ate their food all the way through, but never said how delicious it really was and how much she appreciated their hard work. So now that she saw the happiness on Helen's face, she really wanted to say it. Hugging her back, Serena smiled and said the opposite. She should have been grateful to her for letting her do something she was really good at. That same night, when Ruan heard about all these successes, she was beyond furious because she didn't understand how this could have happened. The girl did not understand what the siren had to do to earn favor from Helen. It was impossible to like this woman in any way, but somehow the young lady managed to do it. So instead of bullying the inferior now, the cook did not want to dismiss her, but only to take this maid as her assistant and leave her at the manor as long as possible. This was terrible news for Ruan, for she did not like this girl very much. Of course, she felt even a bad feeling about the whole matter, so she had to make sure that the siren would definitely not be able to cope. The girl felt that she should find some kind of job that siren would fail at quickly. She even thought about giving her an assignment that no one could definitely handle anymore. Then she could find a way to get her fired. And indeed, the next morning, a new and most terrible ordeal awaited the siren. She was sent to the stable to be cleaned there. As soon as the girl went outside to get some fresh air, she was happy that she could finally take at least a breath. First, it was a kitchen job, which she enjoyed very much, but now she was forced to clean a wild horse's stable, which was in the worst condition. Serena didn't understand why she was constantly being reassigned to different areas of work, but figured it was probably to test all her skills. As the girl approached the horse, she thought about the fact that this was certainly definitely not a task she would give up on, but more importantly, how she would accomplish it. As she petted the animal, she said that it was rather strange that this horse was called Wild, for it looked very dignified and beautiful. Serena spoke to the horse and immediately wondered who the owner was, and also, was he really so generous that he could even give one horse such a huge stable? But at that moment, the girl suddenly heard some strange sound nearby, and when a strong wind blew on her, she immediately realized that it was just a draft, which even mussed her hair a little, because of which she had to fix it. But as soon as she turned her head to the side and saw some man coming into the stable, she was very surprised. He was a rather handsome young man with dark long hair, and she was at once very surprised, for she had never seen him before, and did not know who he was at all. For a while they just stood there looking at each other, not even uttering a single word. The moment she saw this man, one name that she didn't expect to remember immediately popped into her mind. For some reason, the siren thought of Cassus, the same god of war she knew from her previous life when everyone thought she was a goddess. This man wielded a very large sword and protected all of his warriors. He was young, stunning, and really well behaved in war, even despite the rather stressful situations. The man spoke to the siren first. He suddenly made a very serious expression and wondered if he had some dirt on his body that was causing her to stare at him so intently. This made the girl feel very uncomfortable and immediately said that it wasn't like that at all. Of course, the girl was very surprised that she completely lost focus and didn't even say hello to this man. She stared at the man's face so fiercely that she didn't even realize where her dignity as a princess had gone, for she had followed etiquette and rules of norms of behavior all her life. So the girl immediately apologized to him and said that she was just trying to take a closer look and see who he even was. Because of this, the man was no longer very happy with their interaction and rudely inquired who she even was. But without waiting for an answer, he said that what interested him most was what some probationary maid was doing in his private stables. As soon as the sire heard this, she immediately smiled and said that he was probably the one who owned this beautiful horse. She stroked the animal again, while the man realized what was even going on. He was actually surprised by the fact that the girl was acting quite open and not shy about anything. He also noticed that the horse, which had been far too wild to even just stand in the stable, was suddenly so docile to the maid. This, of course, surprised him greatly, so he now began to look at this girl questioningly, not understanding who this amazing maid could be because he had never seen her before. Serena, at this moment, after calming her horse, immediately bowed. She gave her name and said that she was a maid on probation in order to work in that estate in the future. The man, paying attention to her every gesture, noticed that her appearance and demeanor were far too refined for her to be a mere maid. But above all, he was struck by the look she was giving him. He didn't notice an ounce of fear in it, which was, a priori, astonishing. Normally, whoever looked at the man was always horrified at the mere sight of him, even before he started talking, and she acted completely calm.